I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers, and let's get right to those big wins for Democrats across the country in the first elections of the second Trump administration.
Yeah, it might be an off-year election in an odd-numbered year, but voters still made their voices heard. The Democratic Party secured wins in key races and measures and now hope to keep the momentum going into next year's midterms. Let's begin right there in New York City. NBC News projects Zohran Mamdani will become the city's next mayor. He soundly defeated former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo, who ran as an independent after losing to Mamdani during the primary over the summer. Mamdani, a 34-year-old Democratic socialist, will become the youngest New York City mayor in a century. The win for Mamdani spotlights his rapid rise in politics since launching his campaign just last year. Across the Hudson River in New Jersey, NBC News projects Democrat Mikey Sherrill will become the state's next governor. She defeated Republican Jack Ciattarelli in a race that was forecast to be tight, but in the end was a rout for Sherrill. Also, history was made in Virginia as Democrat Abigail Spanberger is projected to become the first woman to ever lead the Commonwealth. She came out victorious in her gubernatorial race against Republican Lieutenant Governor Winsome Earl Sears. And in California, voters have overwhelmingly approved a Democratic-drawn congressional map. Governor Gavin Newsom says that Prop 50 sends a powerful message to President Trump. We have plenty of reaction ahead this morning to last night's election results, including from the White House, where President Trump is once again calling for changes to the election system across the country. Let's begin with NBC News correspondent Sam Brock, who's here in studio to help us break down the results. Sam, you were there last night with Zohran Mamdani's celebration in New York. I mean, it really is historic. We know President Trump tried to weigh in at the last minute, endorsing Andrew Cuomo. Of course, Cuomo defeated by Mamdani in the primary. Set the stage. What was the coalition that kind of rallied around Mamdani to help him win? And what was his message to supporters and really to the city of New York last night?
What a scene and a remarkable political phenomenon, guys. You're talking about a 34-year-old Democratic socialist, he said, and a Muslim. And I am not apologizing for any of this. That so perfectly captures the essence of his campaign. His first remark to supporters last night were this: for so long, the working class has been told the power does not belong in your hands. Well, guess what? Through this election, not only does the power belong in your hands, we just toppled a political dynasty. You're referring to Andrew Cuomo, who was a 3-term governor in New York, right? So the idea that this person who came out of nowhere with a populist message overtook someone who was a household name in New York politics is remarkable in its own right. But he did so around the messaging of affordability and giving people an actual plan, right? He said he's going, and we'll see if it happens, but he promised to be delivering free buses and universal childcare, which for so many families, especially in a city like New York, is exorbitantly expensive. In order to achieve those goals, Mamdani has talked about the idea of raising taxes, and this gets to the Democratic Socialist platform, on millionaires in New York, a 2% tax increase, as well as matching the New Jersey tax rate, the corporate tax rate in New York City. He's going to need help from the legislature to accomplish that. He can't do it unilaterally, but he has promised big plans, and that really has resonated with a lot of folks. I will also say I had a conversation with a young woman last night who said, I'm one of the people, Muslim Americans, that lived in New York City in the shadows of 9/11. When Islamophobia was everywhere, I relate to everything that he said about feeling like an outsider and my identity not being as important as someone else's. So it was, to your original point, a coalition of a lot of different things, Joe, that converged together. But Mamdani's point was, let's think bigger. I'm not going to bow to the altar of caution. That was the phrase that really stuck out to me last night. Here's some of what he said on stage. Take a listen.
Thank you for the opportunity to prove myself worthy of your trust. I will wake each morning with a singular purpose: to make this city better for you than it was the day before. This will be an age where New Yorkers expect from their leaders a bold vision of what we will achieve, rather than a list of excuses for what we are too timid to attempt.
Another significantly striking portion of his speech last night. He said, and now to President Trump, because you're probably listening, turn up the volume. The corruption is going to be rooted out. The billionaires that are evading, taxes and exploiting loopholes, forget about that. That day is over. And by the way, this is a city that was founded by immigrants, fueled by immigrants, and is now led by an immigrant. Of course, there has been so much conversation, guys, about what the federal government is going to do, and President Trump specifically when it comes to immigration raids in New York City, potentially withholding federal funding, whether that's constitutional or not. We'll find out. But this is basically Mamdani's response to Washington and saying we're here and we're not going anywhere.
So many layers there of just how historic the nature is, no matter what. Sam, let's also talk about the two big races for governor. There's New Jersey and Virginia. Walk us through those two Democratic campaigns that won in those states.
These were the first two gubernatorial races since version 2.0 of Trump has been in the Oval Office. So in many ways, it was viewed, guys, as a litmus test for where things stand. I do think the New Jersey race is the most significant one here. A, because President Trump said it was. B, because there were $200 million spent on this race. That is an all-time record. And C, look at the spread on that. Mikey Sherrill, 56% of the vote to 43% for Jack Ciattarelli, who is a Trump-aligned or MAGA-aligned Republican who almost won 4 years ago with this huge shift of the voting population, and specifically young men and Latino voters, moving to the right. Well, if that's not an endorsement of Sherrill's sort of populist message, she said she was going to freeze electricity rates and soaring costs. I mean, certainly the affordability component came into the New Jersey side of things, but this was seen as a litmus and a possible toss-up, and she won resoundingly. That was remarkable. As far as Abigail Spanberger winning in Virginia as well, the proximity to D.C. is very important. There are so many federal workers right now who are either working without paychecks or who are furloughed. She spoke to that. She spoke to an economic populism, but she also campaigned on abortion rights, and she won significantly by 15+ percentage points. For Democrats wondering what the tea leaves were showing in a post-Trump second administration era, we found out last night, at least in the early going, that the message of affordability and where Americans are feeling about the economy sort of skew toward the Democratic messaging. We'll see if that sticks.
All right. Sam Brock, a lot to cover. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Well, for more on last night's big night for Democrats, let's bring in Dave Wasserman. He's the senior editor and elections analyst for the Cook Political Report with Amy Walter, and also the man who coined the election night phrase, "I've seen enough," before he calls a race. Dave, good morning. Thanks very much for being with us. So, I mean, as Sam just pointed out, some of these races were just really not that close. I mean, you look at that spread there on New Jersey governor, for example. How much were last night's results a rebuke of the Trump administrations? What are your big takeaways?
Yeah, these were statement wins for governor. But when I look under the surface, there were also a couple of questions that I had heading into Election Day. Where would Democrats end up in the Virginia House of Delegates? Well, they ended up picking up 13 seats and getting to a 64-36 majority. And the reason that's significant is Democrats won every single seat that was won by Trump by 4.5 points or less, or that Trump had lost in 2024. If you were to superimpose that on the U.S. House, Democrats would be on track for a narrow majority, even despite the gerrymandering push that the White House has embarked on. Keep in mind that Proposition 50 in California passed, which allows Democrats to counter what Republicans did in Texas and kind of reduce the Republican redistricting advantage heading into 2026. And then the second question I had was related to Hispanic voters. Would we see a snapback from their big swing to Trump in 2024? And in both Virginia and New Jersey, we saw that. Take, for example, the most Hispanic locality in Virginia, Manassas Park, outside D.C. That's a place that voted for Kamala Harris by 20 points in 2024. It voted for Abigail Spanberger by 42 points yesterday. That was the biggest single swing of any locality in the state. Hudson County, New Jersey, a place where Kamala Harris only won by 28 points. Mikey Sherrill won it by 49, which snaps back to a typical Democratic margin. It shows that these voters on inflation or immigration and ICE were snapping back to their Democratic roots. Or Passaic County, New Jersey, which went from a 3-point Trump win in 2024 to a 15-point Sherrill win.
Yeah, NBC News polls, exit polls yesterday showing nearly 70% of Latino voters in both Virginia and New Jersey voting for the Democrat in those races. Let's talk about here in New York City. Mamdani's big win against Cuomo in the race for New York City mayor. The Democratic Socialists, as we just discussed, energized progressives across the city. But even beyond that, he also generated backlash from the White House. So walk us through Mamdani's win here and what we can expect from City Hall starting January 1st.
Well, First of all, it shows that that the president doesn't carry all that much political weight in New York City, or if he does, it's in a negative direction. Zohran Mamdani won a majority of the vote despite late attempts to consolidate the opposition behind Andrew Cuomo. Now, Zohran Mamdani also made lofty campaign promises that will be difficult to enact on day one or even day 100 of his mayoral administration. So I expect to see a lot of confrontation. I expect the White House to elevate Mamdani as the face of the Democratic Party to try to rally Republican turnout heading into 2026 beyond what we saw yesterday.
Dave, let's talk California now. NBC News projecting that Prop 50 ballot initiative, as we mentioned, it'll redraw congressional districts to favor Democrats. That was overwhelmingly approved by voters. What should we know about this win for the party, what it ultimately means for control of Congress as we see measures like this taken up across the country?
Well, this was a huge push by Democrats, and it paid off with the initiative winning by 28 points. There wasn't meaningful Republican spending towards the end. It is a necessary prerequisite for Democrats to have a chance to offset what Republicans are doing elsewhere in these gerrymandering wars. And it allows Democrats to pick up between 3 and 5 seats. The delegation could go from 43-9 in Democrats' favor to 48-4. Only 4 federal office holders for on the Republican side for the entire state of California. Now, keep in mind, Republicans have more opportunities to gerrymander elsewhere outside of California and Texas than Democrats do. They have already redrawn Missouri, North Carolina. They're also looking at Indiana and possibly Florida. But Virginia Democrats have opened up a new front in these redistricting wars with what happened yesterday, particularly sweeping the statewide offices, including Attorney General. And if Democrats send the issue to voters in Virginia in the spring, it could allow them to purge 2 to 3 Republican seats from that state. This is a game of inches in the House, getting to 218 seats in 2026. Right now, Democrats might be considered the very slight favorites, but it's going to come down to every single seat, which is why both parties are clawing for every advantage they can get.
All right, Dave Wasserman, we appreciate your time this morning. Thanks so much.
At the White House, President Trump is calling for changes to the election system after Democrats swept the top races in the first major election of his second term. In a post to Truth Social, the president called on Congress to, quote, pass voter reform, voter ID, and no mail-in ballots.
He also claimed without evidence that there was voter fraud surrounding California's Prop 50 ballot measure, which, as we just mentioned, is that effort to redraw the state's congressional maps along party lines. That was done in response to similar efforts by Republicans in Texas.
NBC News White House correspondent Monica Alba joins us from Washington with more on the president's response. Monica, good morning. So President Trump was busy on Truth Social yesterday. He made these unsubstantiated claims of voter fraud for years, most notably after he lost the 2020 election. But he also used his social media platform to rail against certain voters. So tell us more about that and just some of the response to these posts.
Yeah, and I think these posts really were an indication of where the president's mind was at. A lot of these were actually pre-buttals before polls had even closed, sort of trying to prepare Republicans for perhaps what these results were ultimately going to be, which, of course, was a big night for the Democrats. But specifically, the president has been going after now the mayor-elect of New York City, Zohran Mamdani, repeatedly. And he put this in the context of any, he said, quote, Jewish person that votes for him because he is alleging he is a, quote, self-professed Jew hater is, quote, a stupid person. Of course, that was met with some criticism, certainly from people saying that that is anti-Semitic and claiming that that went too far. And this is something that the president has seized on, has called him also a communist, which he says he is not. He's a democratic socialist. But this is a clear battle that you are likely going to continue to see with the White House continuing to take aim at Mayor-elect Mamdani because, of course, for the president, it's personal as well. And in New York, he has already threatened, he says, to withhold federal funding from the city and the state in response to this. But you guys also mentioned these issues of the claims of widespread voter fraud for which there is absolutely no evidence. That's something the president continues to talk about. But also he's trying to say that Republicans should abolish the filibuster. But there is absolutely no appetite on Capitol Hill among Republican leadership to actually do that. So I think you were seeing a president president, continuing to air some grievances there. And you saw Republicans try to put a lot of distance between the president and some of these losses for Republicans in states that Republicans continue to point out are left-leaning states, guys.
So, Monica, clearly last night did not go the president's way. When we've seen something like that happen in the past, previous administrations, previous presidents have sort of then, made efforts to get out on the road, get their message to the American people. Is there anything on the horizon like that for President Trump at this point?
I think there are discussions in the White House about certainly seizing on some of the messaging they want to amplify. And one way that they're going to do that today is they're going to try to frame this as 1 year ago, President Trump really received they will argue, this massive mandate with his election victory. And they're going to try to highlight what they view as their greatest accomplishments of the last 10 months or so in office. And so the president's going to be traveling to Miami today for a speech in which I think you will see him try to talk about some of those things and look to the future. But your question about travel and campaigning, certainly Donald Trump didn't do any of that for this off-year election. But I think once we start to talk about the midterm elections, that plan will probably look a little bit different. And he will be getting out there in the coming months, though this is a president who has traveled almost as much overseas and to other countries than he has to states so far in this first year in his second term.
Monica, while we have you, I want to get to some other news from Washington. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said U.S. forces carried out yet another strike on a vessel in the Eastern Pacific. It's the 16th strike on a suspected drug boat since President Trump took office. What more are we learning here?
Yeah, the defense secretary said that 2 people were killed. Again, this is an argument the Trump administration has made. They allege that these are narco traffickants who are moving, they say, again, alleged drugs from that area into the United States, and that's why they've been arguing they need to continue to take them out. But lawmakers are really clamoring for more information. They want to know more about the intelligence that's leading to these decisions and why the president feels he has the authority to continue to carry out and order these strikes. And so today, Secretary of State Marco Rubio actually will be briefing some key lawmakers on that, which is something they have been asking for more transparency on. Joe and Savannah.
Monica Alba. Monica, thank you so much. This morning, the key policy behind the Trump administration's economic agenda faces a major test before the Supreme Court. It's yet another legal battle over the limits of presidential authority.
This time, the court is set to hear oral arguments in a high-stakes case on whether President Trump has the legal right to impose these sweeping tariffs on international imports, as we've seen him do this year. You'll remember what President Trump called Liberation Day back in April. He announced tariffs ranging from 10 to 50% on imports from more than 100 trading partners around the world. Well, now the president is appealing a decision in the lower courts that ruled that his tariffs were an illegal overreach because they were enacted using a law designed for use during a national emergency.
For more on this, let's bring in NBC News senior Supreme Court reporter Lawrence Hurley. Lawrence, good to have you with us. So President Trump is making it explicitly clear how important this case is to him. He posted on Truth Social last night saying the case is, quote, literally life or death for our country. He even suggested he would go in person to today's oral arguments. That would make him the first president to do that. Why is this case so crucial to his agenda? Break it down for us here.
Well, the first thing to remember is that President Trump just really loves tariffs. And this is something that even predates his presidency. He thinks that the U.S. has been kind of badly treated by other countries, and that's why we need to have tariffs on goods coming in from overseas. And it kind of suits his sort of wheeler-dealer style of presidency, where he can kind of impose these tariffs on different goods and countries, and then he can lift them, and he can have exemptions for certain companies and certain goods, and people come to him and lobby for this. So he's clearly just loves it, the idea. And it's also important, if you remember when Congress passed his big, beautiful bill earlier this year, they claimed partly that it would be revenue neutral because of the money that was coming in from the tariffs. So if they lose that tariff revenue, that would lead to other problems with balancing the books on the big, beautiful bill.
So, Lawrence, to try to make this, say this as non-wonky as possible, the issue really here, the big question, it's around a law. It's from 1977, and it's called the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. And That basically allows the president to regulate imports when there is an emergency. But before President Trump began his second term, no president had ever used a law in this way to impose tariffs. Walk us through, legally, what the court will be ruling on and what the outcome could be for all those tariffs.
So I'll try not to be too wonky, but, it is the Supreme Court.
You're doing a great job.
So one key issue here is the Supreme Court's conservative majority is often very skeptical of any president trying to use a law that hasn't been used for a purpose like, a broad economic or social purpose before. That doesn't explicitly say that you can do this, right? And so this law, that actually doesn't even mention tariffs, right? So some of the justices might look at this and say, well, where does it say tariffs? And that might be the end of the case. But you also think of when President Joe Biden was president, the court repeatedly struck down Biden policies that sought to do these kind of broad policies through old laws, including his effort to end do student loan debt relief. And the court said then that, they basically embraced this doctrine called the Major Questions Doctrine that said the president can't do this unless Congress specifically says he can. So that could also be a play in this case.
Lawrence, we know this isn't the first time the Supreme Court has faced a hotly disputed case involving the president's authority under this administration. And the 6-3 conservative majority has repeatedly backed the president. But those have been on sort of a temporary basis while other legislation plays out. Are the conservative justices, does it seem like they could be at a crossroads here? Have they set a precedent in past rulings that could become a factor in this case?
Yeah, I mean, definitely this case is a huge test for the court, right? What is the court going to push back on President Trump's broad assertions of executive power? It hasn't done that so far in these interim cases that you mentioned. A lot of those were on these kind of core issues of presidential power, such as his ability to reorganize the federal government or do immigration issues. So this case is a little different in that sense. It's also so broad for the economy. So I think even a lot of legal experts who were kind of broadly supportive of what the court's done in the other cases think this case is more of a toss-up, and it could set the tone, really for the rest of the administration when it comes to some of these other big policies they might want to do.
Lawrence, real quick, when do you think we get an answer on this one?
Yeah, so normally the court takes months to decide a case, but they did agree to hear this on an expedited basis. So I think, once we have the arguments, we could get a ruling pretty quickly. Kind of depends, obviously, on how in agreement the justices are and how much wrangling there is behind the scenes.
All right. Lawrence, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Well, let's stay in Washington. The government shutdown, it's hitting a new milestone. Now it's 36 days, so that means it is the longest on record. And that comes after a vote to temporarily fund the government failed for the 14th time in the Senate yesterday.
Despite this impasse, there is growing talk among some lawmakers on Capitol Hill that a deal to end the shutdown could be on the horizon.
NBC News Washington correspondent Alice Barr joins us now. So, Alice, that kind of started yesterday. Are we seeing maybe some hope? Is there a little bit of thawing here? Now that these elections are out of the way, especially, does it seem likely that a deal could be in the works?
Yes, Vanna and Joe, that does seem to be potentially the case. Some senators are suggesting Democrats may take their election wins as an off-ramp to end what is now the longest ever government shutdown as soon as tomorrow or Friday. Republican Senator Markwayne Mullin of Oklahoma said he's been talking to rank-and-file Democrats who were ready to vote to reopen the government last week. But Mullin said that Minority Leader Chuck Schumer had urged them not to cast those votes until after the elections to avoid losing support and driving down turnout among the liberal base that wants to see the party hold the line. A couple other Republican senators, Mike Rounds, Eric Schmidt, had taken similar takes, saying this was all about the elections. Chuck Schumer's office had no immediate comment, but other Democrats are dismissing those arguments. Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut, for instance, calling it, quote, cynical galaxy brain thinking. Regardless, it does seem clear that discussions, at least among rank and file members, are ramping up, and that is a shift that's offering some hope we could be getting closer to the end.
So until this deal comes, we are certainly seeing plenty of disruption around the country, especially at airports. I flew yesterday. I was at Memphis. Our plane was there, but we were told point blank we were taking off an hour and a half late because of the air traffic controller shortage at LaGuardia. And when I did land, it was after 11 p.m. I saw 15 flights at LaGuardia still delayed.
Jeez.
They hadn't taken off yet. Many of them weren't going to take off. Some angry passengers there. So yesterday, the Transportation Secretary, Sean Duffy, warned what might happen if this stretches on into next week. What's he saying?
Yeah, Joe, condolences to you and all those who have to be in the air right now. Yeah, we've been seeing warning lights blinking from the nation's airports for some time now, but the transportation secretary sharply escalated those warnings, saying that the system is reaching something of a breaking point as air traffic controllers are under worsening strain, still working without pay. Listen to him.
If you bring us to a week from today, Democrats, you will see mass chaos, you will see mass flight delays, you'll see mass cancellations, and you may see us close certain parts of the airspace because we just cannot manage it because we don't have the air traffic controllers.
And that's just one way that the shutdown is, having real world impacts. But it is one that, many of us, Joe, among us, can attest to, that it touches people all over the country and it reminds them we are in a government shutdown and it matters.
Alice, one of the other things just like that's impacting so many Americans is this uncertainty for millions who rely on federal food assistance. We had this recent court ruling that said the administration had to continue funding the food assistance program. But President Trump said on social media yesterday that that program, those SNAP benefits, as they're called, will only be given when the Democrats open up the government. So what is going on here? Is the administration complying with the order? Is this still being funded?
They are, according to White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt, who said the administration is getting payments out the door as quickly as possible. She said the president's post was referring to future SNAP payments. But we know the system is backed up. Only partial payments are going to be coming out, and they are on a delay. The administration saying it had to wait for legal guidance, as Democrats are arguing the money was clearly there to release the full amounts all along, and that really became part of the election messaging that we saw yesterday as well, guys.
All right, Alice, thank you so much. Let's get you some weather now. Heavy rain continues to soak the Northwest with no sign of letting up anytime soon. Let's get a check with your Morning News Now forecast.
Meteorologist Angie Lassman joins us. Angie, good morning.
Hi, guys. Good morning. We've got, of course, that really active pattern that's kind of been setting up over the past couple of days for folks across the Pacific Northwest. And we've also got a clipper system that we're watching kind of quickly move across parts of the Midwest and then eventually into the Northeast. But let's start out west. You can see all of that heavy rain. We've got an atmospheric river developing, and some spots really stretching from California up the coast are looking at an extreme level of that. So that means that additional heavy rain. We've also got some really strong winds, not just for folks across the east, but for the west as well. Notice those alerts there include Medford, San Francisco, and they're totaling up to 11 million people. Wind gusts there, 30, 40, 50 miles per hour. And of course, as you go higher into those elevations, you'll see those higher numbers too. Meanwhile, for the east, we've got 46 million people. It's across the Northeast, Buffalo to Burlington, down through New York, Boston included in there, as well as Cleveland, where some of these wind advisories, these high wind watches and high wind warnings are in effect as we gear up for another kind of gusty day as this system quickly moves across parts of the Great Lakes this morning. That's where the rain will be centered for the first half of the day, although you can see some of this higher elevation snow kind of working across parts of the Northeast. And then notice that rain gets into New York, New England this afternoon. We'll see the potential for a couple of these stronger storms to develop as well, potentially becoming severe for a few of those. So heads up there, but needing the umbrella, needing a little extra time for that evening commute tonight. And then that system, as quick as it moved in, moves out. Now, the one thing that will be left over here as we get into tonight are some really strong winds. Those are going to actually ramp up behind the system across the Northeast, and we'll still be looking at some additional snowfall across parts of those of the Northeast where we've got those higher elevations. So heads up there. A much different story if you look down to the south, where it's there's no snow in sight. It's actually feeling like summer in some spots. Houston, 81 degrees today. Shreveport at 80. We've got the 70s for St. Louis, guys. Upper 60s for even Philadelphia today. That warmth stays centered across the middle of the country here as we get into tomorrow, too. And then we'll kind of start to see the northern tier settling into some more typical temperatures.
Looks nice there in most of the country.
Joe is about to book a flight. Or
I was just there, and it was nice, I have to admit. So great. Good for them.
Except for that airport.
Thanks, Angie.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.